Ace Atkins abandoned a successful mystery series, the Nick Travers novels, to focus on real crimes in real cities, Tampa, Florida, and Phoenix City, Alabama. I spoke with Ace Atkins at the 11th Annual Alabama Literary Symposium in Monroeville, Alabama. Well, Ace, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Last time we spoke, you had finished 4 Nick Travers novels, and you told me at the end of that, when I asked you at the end of that interview, what are you going to do next? You said, well, no more Nick Travers. I'm going in a new direction.
Yeah.
And you have been going in a new direction. You're now the author of 2 standalone novels, still crime novels, noir, mystery, murder, but not a series.
No.
Why did you leave what was obviously working very well?
Boredom. I had a lot of fun writing those books, but essentially what I had been doing writing my Nick Travers stories were traditional detective books. They
Yes.
were very much cut in the mold of Hammett and Chandler, and I really didn't feel I was bringing anything new to the table. I enjoyed those books. They were great fun. They seemed to be picking up a readership, but I wanted to do something that other writers were not bringing to readers. It's something that I felt people could really become fascinated with and interested in. And for me, being an old reporter, it's true stories. And those true stories are the ones that you really can grab the reader with and that people really want to know more about. And once I started down that path, writing straight fiction did not have the same allure.
Well, there are 4 Nick Travers books. He is a professor of, is he a professor of American Studies, sociology?
Southern Studies, American
Southern
Studies.
Studies
Yeah.
at Tulane.
Right.
And his mysteries are mostly up in the Delta.
Right. And there's always beautiful women involved and psychopathic killers and all kinds.
Steamy
Sex.
Well, I was thinking about the weather, but yes.
Steamy, yes, and the weather.
It's always terribly hot
course.
in the Mississippi Delta. Well, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle killed Sherlock Holmes, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but Walter Mosley has just killed Easy Rawlins. You didn't kill Nick, though.
No, I reserve the right that if we ever get a movie deal, I can pull him out of the closet and put him back to work. So,
And Nick was good for you, and you bought a farm outside of Oxford, Mississippi. Are you farming?
I do a little farming. I wouldn't say I'm a farmer, but I do raise my own vegetables, and I have a pretty nice little chunk of land where I raise corn and tomatoes, and I enjoy it.
But you're in Faulkner country. Did that play any part in choosing to live near Oxford?
It did. I mean, initially the main reason that brought me to Oxford was to teach. And I came in to teach at the Ole Miss Journalism School, and I did that for 4 years, and I enjoyed that very much, but it was certainly a part-time profession. It was not in any way my main job. My main job was writing books. But certainly to anybody who is a serious novelist, the draw of being in Faulkner country and seriously just wrapping yourself in that world is extremely attractive, and I love it. And I had always read Faulkner in college. I had been told to read Faulkner, but it really obviously comes alive when you're living there in Yoknapatawpha County.
Do you sense that people in Oxford, I know they market Faulkner, no two ways about
Sure.
that.
But do they read
Do
it?
they read Faulkner? Is he a part of their lives in any meaningful way?
I have to be very careful how I answer that question. I think that there are a vast amount of people that are not from that area that have retired to Oxford. And I think they are interested in it being a literary community. How serious they follow that and study Faulkner, I don't know. I know that there are a lot of grad students who are reading Faulkner all the time. But as far as, of course, even in Faulkner's day, many people that lived in Oxford did not think very much of him, and they did not think of him being a serious part of the community.
They thought he was unemployed.
Right.
Exactly. He didn't go to a job that they understood.
Right.
You tell a story sometimes about Faulkner in the community. Was it a clerk in a hardware store, a clerk at a lumber yard? What is it?
When I first moved to Mississippi and I bought my farm, there was a tremendous amount of work to do, and I went out to a little place called Discount Lumber and got some 2x4s, and as you're coming out, there's a guy outside who checks your tag to make sure you got the correct lumber that matches your receipt. And he saw I had started to make a serious study of Faulkner, and I decided to go all the way through and just read everything. And I had a copy of Absalom on my passenger seat, and he looked over and he looked over at me, and he's kind of a scruffy guy wearing a baseball hat, and he said, I always found The Unvanquished much more accessible. And I said, really? And he said, you need to try that. And he was right. It was a wonderful entry point into starting Faulkner. And of course, I had already gotten beyond that stage, but I went back and read The Unvanquished, and it's kind of the Rosetta Stone into letting everything click. And then once that fog clears from Faulkner and you understand it, everything is just can't compare.
Apparently, you had struck him as a person who wasn't ready for Absalom.
No.
Who needed to step
Yep,
back.
Right. I guess.
And work your way in through the more accessible.
Yes.
I'm sure you're managing just fine with
I
the
did
Faulkner.
fine. Yes, I did fine.
You were one of the Auburn writers. So we speak of, for our ag and tech and industrial school, Auburn produces a lot of writers.
Yes.
You were not an English major, though. You were a journalism person.
Well, actually, I wasn't in the journalism school. I actually got a degree in mass communication, which was, I kind of wanted to hedge my bets. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I got out of school.
And down at Tampa, where you worked, you were a crime reporter?
I was a crime reporter. That was the job that a lot of people at the paper did not want. They wanted to move on to sports. They wanted to write in the features section. They wanted to do a variety of things. But for me, I knew the place to be was on the crime beat. And of course, very influenced by Hemingway. And Hemingway always talked about the best training he in the world was at the Kansas City Star, and going out chasing ambulances and getting to meet detectives and getting in and learning kind of the pulse of life, which in any major city is on that beat. Learning about what's going on from day to day, the major events, going to the city council meetings, finding out the way that your city ticks and the way it works. It was a wonderful education. And at that point in my life, I really could have gone one or two ways. I could have gone towards more of an MFA route, or I could have done what I did, and I will never regret getting out and learning finding out about life and meeting people at all different levels and wonderful training.
Well, when you left the Nick Travers series after the 4 and you went to White Shadow, what is the connection between the novel set in Tampa, right?
Yes.
And what I often hear about a series, I think, of stories that for which you alone or you in a group were nominated for the Pulitzer.
I was for a series of articles that I did. I was nominated.
Yes,
so.
and were those
it's just an honor being nominated, is what I like to say.
Well, it is. It is. It's in fact, I was recently told that if you get nominated, the odds of winning are only 1 in 4. Whereas getting nominated, it's 4 in 1,000.
Well, it was a great opportunity, and that's what led to that story. Is what I decided to do. I had been writing for the paper for several years, and I learned about this incredible court case from the 1950s about the murder about this woman named Edie Parkhill, who her father was the top defense attorney in town, represented several of the big mafia players, and she was killed. And it was something like out of L.A. Confidential. It was an incredible story, and I decided to turn this into a narrative piece and to reopen the case. And the readers just really seemed to enjoy it, and it changed my life as far as the direction of my writing.
In so-called real life, did your journalistically reopening the case take it anywhere?
Yeah, I think we came to a conclusion about it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily I found out that one of the people that was a suspect at the time later was convicted of a similar crime, and that matched up pretty. It was a pretty comparable crime.
M.O.
Yeah, it was a guy who was. Again, this is the wonderful thing that I like about writing these true stories. This guy was a former alcoholic detective that in his off time he played jazz piano down at the downtown clubs in Tampa. Mm-hmm. I can't make up a character like that. And his name was Fred Bender. Slightly crooked cop. Wonderful
Slightly
stuff.
Alcoholic.
Slightly alcoholic.
Crooked.
Yeah, great.
Bender.
Exactly.
That's great.
I know.
What's the connection between that story, the series in the paper, and White Shadow? Is there a link there, or are they just the same time and place?
No, one fed into the other. Although White Shadow is really a prequel to this 7-part series I did called Tampa Confidential. The guy, John Parkhill, who was married to Edie Parkhill's husband, the defense attorney, he actually had represented a guy named Charlie Wall. Charlie Wall was the kingpin of Tampa during Prohibition, and he was kind of the Anglo Don of Tampa, and his murder set off this massive investigation, which was the basis for White Shadow.
Now, Charlie Wall is an old man by the time he gets killed.
Yes, yeah.
How's he, 70 or something?
Well, he was in his mid-70s, but it was more interesting because he was retired from the rackets, and people could not figure out this guy should have been killed
in
20 years.
1928.
Right, exactly. I mean, he did. So they asked during the Kefauver Commission. They said, "Mr. Wall, how many times has someone tried to kill you?" And he said, "So many times that I don't even know. I can't even remember how many times people have tried to kill me." And he was paranoid. He lived in a house where he would go into the garage, and there was a steel-lined tunnel that would take him into the main house. And so when he turned up dead, this was years past his prime, and he was living in retirement. And it set off this massive investigation into the killing. It was a huge news story, and I reopened the case and studied it for a year and a half, 2 years, meeting with the old detectives, going to the crime scene, doing all this kind of stuff, but then having to flip around that research and start working as a novelist and make it work as a book.
You do a lot of interviewing. When you were interviewing old detectives, that's one thing, but interviewing old mobsters is slightly more problematic. How'd that go for you?
Well, sometimes the people, in my interviewing, both as a reporter and as a novelist, I find that the people who probably shouldn't talk to you and have the most to hide are the most open. And the ones that you think would just be completely open and very giving with their time because you're going to make them look good are the most closed. And so it's a strange thing, but I've got to know some definitely people who've worked on the other side of the law, and they've told me amazing stories. In fact, I just had a nice conversation with a guy named Angelo Badami, whose father was the top hitman in Tampa in the 50s and 60s. And I thought Angelo would be very mad about the betrayal of his father, and he ended up telling me, he said, "You got Pops just right." So I thought that was nice.
His father,
the
killer.
The hitman. He was very good at his job.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Take pride in something. Yeah.
Tampa, 1955. Then you move from there to Phoenix City, 1954. 1954. You weren't born yet, so there's no nostalgia involved.
Right.
But what is it about, obviously, about the culture of the 50s? I was there, and I think you find it a lot more interesting than I did. What is it about it that attracts you as a site for your fiction?
Well, I think that the 50s did live on even after I was born. There were places and restaurants and obviously people that were, their heyday were the 1950s, not just being kids. And that world is just so close, and my parents were products of the 50s, growing up in the 1950s. And it is the pinnacle, the zenith of American culture. And for me, I just love writing about the time period and the obsession, the post-war mentality of America is just a wonderful place to set a book. And there's so many contrasting emotions that are going on.
I've got to ask you, what is the pinnacle or zenith of American culture in the 50s that you're referring to? I mean, a lot of people think of it as boring, you know?
Well, it was fat and happy times.
Yes.
I mean, we were very, very content, and we wanted to pour ourselves a strong drink, and we just saved the world, and we wanted big cars, and we wanted, beautiful women, and we wanted everyone just to kind of leave us alone, but didn't work that way. But it was a very content time for America. But also for my fiction, or for the truth, I shouldn't say my fiction, it was also a time period that was a very surface level and a very glossed over time. I mean, what we imagine as the 1950s, what people portray as the 1950s culture is not the way things were. It just was something that there was this veneer. And the fun thing for me to write about is stripping away that veneer and talking about what was really going on in these fat and happy times.
Crime, violence, adultery had all been invented.
Right.
By the 1950s.
Shocking. But those people would tell you that they weren't there. I know people will talk to me blue in the face, say the 50s were an idyllic time in American history, and that everybody got along with their neighbors, and the world was a wonderful place, and they had the best cars in the world, which they did. But that
almost the only cars in the world.
Right. But that it was a wonderful time in American history. But it really was a very sordid, seedy, conflicting time period.
When I hear the words sordid and seedy, it brings me right to Phoenix City.
Oh gosh, you talk about the epicenter of seedy and sordid. We're right there. Yeah,
Wicked City. I mean, I have seen the Phoenix City story. I have read When Good Men Do Nothing.
Yeah.
I thought I knew a good deal about it. But I will say that your novel makes Phoenix City nastier than any of the books or movies that I'd seen before. I want to start with the thing that startled me the most. Fiction or research that the hookers were tattooed on the inside of their lower lip
True story. Yeah.
like cattle.
Like cattle, and cattle, they were in a catalog, and you had to register with the sheriff or the deputy sheriff, a guy named Albert Fuller.
Yeah.
And you had to register. It was just like the old days in the Old West. And Tombstone, I visited Tombstone. I saw the same kind of thing. You had a permit to practice your trade.
I'm going to assume that the reason it was impossible to clean up is because the entire criminal justice system was corrupt.
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
it, right?
That's it. I mean, the thing that I wrote about in Tampa when I was researching White Shadow is you didn't know where you stood. There was the gray areas. There were people that, is this guy working for the mafia, or is he straight?
Right.
Who do I trust? Who do I not trust? But in a town like Phoenix City, Alabama, everybody's crooked. Everybody. And I'm not talking about the townspeople that have honest jobs. I'm talking about law enforcement. I'm talking about the legal system. Everything is crooked.
So there's no recourse. I
No.
mean, if you should be mugged,
No, yeah.
I mean, there's no
No.
one to complain to.
No. In fact, there's a famous story that one guy came in and complained. He went into City Hall and said, there's gambling out there, there's prostitution, and you guys get off your butts and do something. They arrested the guy, threw him in jail and for drunk and disorderly.
Were there really trapdoors in the bars that overhung the Chattahoochee River?
That's a famous story, and something that I've asked people about, and some people say absolutely. If there were trapdoors, which I do believe that there were some trapdoors, they would have only been in 4 clubs, one on each side of 14th Street and one on each side of Dillingham Street. So one of those clubs, probably the Bridge Grocery, I'm imagining, would have a trapdoor that if the soldiers got too rowdy, they'd beat the hell out of you. And if you complained about the watered down beer and whiskey, they'd beat the hell out of you and drop you down in the river.
All right, that brings me to
You can't make this stuff up. You see my attraction.
It's wonderful. Yeah. A question that, in fact, not just your novel, not just Wicked City, but the previous works and coverage of Phoenix City. Why did the United States Army, many of whose enlisted men especially were being victimized, why did they not take a more active role in cleaning up Phoenix City?
I think there were some complicated legal matters with that. Once they got off the base, it wasn't under their control. Of course, the famous story, is that George Patton said, "Let me take my tanks over there. I'm losing too many guys. Let me flatten the whole damn town." And it was the Secretary of War during the 40s is the one who coined the phrase "the wickedest city in America." That came from him. Yeah. But I think it was a legal issue why they couldn't get over there and just straighten the town out. And of course, they made Phoenix City off limits to soldiers.
They did.
Absolutely. But how are you going to work? Well, how are you going to keep teenage boys over there with a pocket full of cash, and you say there's whiskey and prostitutes over the river? I mean, they'd have to stay over there with guns and protect the bridges.
Guns.
Right. They would have had to really keep those guys away. But that was obviously an attractive place.
One of the little details, and again, I may have picked this tiny piece of information up from When Good Men Do Nothing. There was a moment when someone thought that a second lieutenant had been a witness to the Albert Patterson murder, and investigators went over to Benning, Fort Benning, and they discovered there were 1,000 second lieutenants. And they were unable to find the one. They thought, we'll just go second lieutenant. Of course, we'll go look at the list and we'll
true
find
story.
it.
And that's in When Good Men Do Nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So many people are looking for the witness of that night.
You gave up something. I've asked this question of a number of people who do the kind of work you do. When you do this, especially when you're involved with a very famous homicide, John Patterson is the Attorney General elect. He's murdered.
Albert
Patterson is elected. He hasn't taken office yet. He's murdered. You give up a certain amount of suspense. You give up a certain amount of plot power, and you obviously think the trade-off is worth it.
Well, for me, another part. No. I think the attraction for writing a truth-based book and writing a novelization of actual events that happened. And again, I don't make any, I'm not trying to confuse people as this nonfiction. This is a story, and I'm working hard to tell this as a novel the best that I can. However, one of the other attractive things, not just these are great stories. I mean, the Charlie Wall story ended up going over to Cuba and involved the mafia players of the time. Phoenix City is one of the great Southern morality plays. Yeah. I mean, all these wonderful tales. But the other attraction for me as a novelist, if I'm going to get better and if I'm going to grow, is somewhat you want the design of the book to disappear. And the attraction for me writing a truth-based book, there is no design, there is no formula. It's just what happened. And at the point that the reader is understanding who is involved in the conspiracy to kill Albert Patterson, this was the time that the investigators were learning this. The people in the town were learning this. They were understanding that the very people entrusted with the investigation are the people that could be connected to the killing.
Right.
So as far as, I'd never want anyone to look at my new books. The old books, obviously, very traditional detective stories. But I don't want anyone to look at my books as mysteries or whodunits. They're novels that involve crime.
You've declined to use some of the prime tools of the novelist, in that, inventing as you go, the reader is saying, oh, my goodness, I wonder what happens next. Well, I knew that Hannah and the National Guard were going to come into Phoenix City.
Sure.
Are you satisfied with, I know it's not a murder mystery, are you satisfied with whodunit?
Yes.
Whodunit?
Yes. I have no doubt in my mind that it was a man named Arch Farrell. Mm-hmm. Arch Farrell was the district attorney of Russell County, which is Phoenix City, Alabama, and that he was responsible. And he was acquitted in 1955. But to me, after talking to not only reporters who covered the story, but looking at the firsthand documents, seeing exactly the way things played out, his alibi, his motive, his opportunity, the idea that he presented his alibi being on the phone to the Attorney General, Cy Garrett, who is also charged with the killing as well, at the very time the murder happened, and that he could see Albert Patterson leaving his law office and walking into there. Mm-hmm. I don't have a doubt in my mind, if I had been on that jury, how I would have voted. And of course, there are so many famous stories of people that we all know were guilty who got off. I mean, O.J. Simpson,
for
instance.
You did here again a lot of interviewing, and most famously among your interviewees was John.
Absolutely.
Patterson.
Absolutely.
Very cooperative?
Extremely cooperative. Former Governor John Patterson was obviously at the epicenter of this. This is a guy whose father was assassinated. He ends up deciding to take over his father's role as the Democratic nominate for the state of Alabama for the Attorney General. He ends up winning, and that ends up launching his bid for becoming governor.
Yeah.
But my time in talking to him was not interested in his political affiliation.
The arc of his whole career.
That was not the point. Is to write about John as the governor and as Attorney General, and that's a whole other story completely. But I was very interested in what it was like being there in Phoenix City in 1954 after your father is assassinated, picking up the pieces, being a non-political person at this point in his life. He was not interested in politics.
Right.
War hero comes home, and being there, knowing all these criminals, knowing that the men that are entrusted to take over this investigation, you have doubts that they weren't the triggermen themselves, being in this hotbed of corruption. There was nobody who knows more about Phoenix City and about that situation than Governor Patterson. And we talked, I can't tell you how many hours we talked on the phone and in person, and added so much detail to the book. He was an immense amount of help.
We have only moments left, but I want you to be able to say the subject of your next novel, because I think I know a little bit about it. I think it's incredible. Your next novel is about what?
I know the people. I kind of, that's one thing as I'm writing, people say everyone's trying to peg you and put you in a genre, and you do this and you do that, and now I've become a Southern crime novelist, and so. But my new book is set in 1921, and it's about the first celebrity scandal in America involving the silent film comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, who was accused of rape murder in 1921, and this trial that took place in late 21, early 22, was the biggest media circus this world has ever seen. And Access Hollywood and our obsession with all the movie stars today, this starts with 1921 and Roscoe Arbuckle. And so that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half is
So you've moved
San
back
Francisco.
a whole 35 years and all the way across the continent.
I have been working my tail off going
All
back
right.
and forth. So
Well, I'm looking forward to that. The story of Fatty Arbuckle and the champagne bottle. That is.
it was supposedly a Coke bottle, but Don, that's not what happened.
I like
That's
to
not
go
what happened.
upscale with this.
Okay, all right. Well,
And when you do, you and I will talk again.
sounds good.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.